A lot of my favorite stories are coming of age and involve characters who discover themselves through their passion, be it music, fighting, sports, cooking, or creating, basically any medium that allows a person to feel alive. I can watch Haikyuu because I play volleyball for sure, but even if I didn't, Hinata's journey as a character would still draw me in regardless by how enveloped he is with the simple ball sport. The progression that these stories draw through their unique gimmick, combined with the protagonist's identity, is why I'm able to resonate with each one, even if they cover different topics. And yet, despite how exciting and rewarding these stories are, I can't help but think about characters who don't got that dog in them, lacking the passion that pushes your life forward and allows you to form your whole identity behind. I've never excelled at any particular sport or had any given talents in the creative arts, and it's not like I've dedicated myself arduously to some random niche specific activity. Combine this with the mounting anxiety of growing older, and it's hard not to question whether the path you're on will truly lead you to where you want to be. Which is why I want to know the stories of the people who just never found their thing, and are stuck in limbo, wandering in life aimlessly. So here's a really quick brief history dump so you can learn something. A psychologist named Erikson took a lifespan approach to studying social development. Separating it into 8 different life stages, a crisis is supposed to occur within each stage, and said person is supposed to overcome the crisis. However, failing to accomplish that stage leads to stagnation and ends up hindering an individual's growth. Specifically, today we're going to look at the 5th stage between ages of 12 to 20, which focuses on identity and role confusion. Succeeding in this area typically leads to a strong sense of self, while failure results in confusion about your role and place in the world. Most coming-of-age stories revolve around Erikson's 5th stage, a pivotal phase in life where protagonists navigate the struggle of discovering who they are. And while many narratives center on adolescence, I found a manga that echoed the same feelings of desperation and uncertainty. Solanin is a sob piece of media that made me want to tear out my innards and throw them onto oncoming traffic windshields. The manga by Inyo Asano, the same guy who wrote Goodnight Punpun and a bunch of other mentally taxing series, is the most boring, mundane thing I've ever laid my eyes on, but at the same time I just could not stop reading it. Meiko is an office lady in the middle of Tokyo, living with her boyfriend who works part-time and plays in a small band. She's at the stage in her life where she feels stagnant, so in the very first chapter she takes a wild leap of faith and just straight up quits her job. Meiko and Tanada's lives are refreshing in a not-so-great way. The first chapters made me want to just drop the series simply by how painful it was to read, and I honestly would have if it wasn't so short and if the story didn't resonate with me on some sort of level. Watching the life of someone who just does absolutely nothing with no greater purpose feels pretty numbing. Meiko's freedom, which she wished so hard to attain while working her job, now burdens her as her freedom with no purpose is just the same thing as boredom. It's through her unemployment arc that Meiko realizes how utterly absurd her life is, and in a conversation with her friend Billy, she asks him if he's happy and if he were to die at this very moment, if he would be satisfied with how his life turned out. The question she asked isn't something he needed to hear, but rather something she needed to say so she herself could understand that at her point in life, with no dreams or purpose, she's just floating around drifting through the current that is your mid-20s. Quitting her job was meant to be something better, Meiko pushing against the way society conforms us and her attempt to be something more than she already is. But she doesn't have anything beyond her job and nothing ignites her soul, forcing her to reach out and grasp for something unattainable. She didn't quit her job because she was sick of it, but because she was fed up with the thought of letting herself stagnate, only to realize that after she quit, she has been stagnant her whole life and simply isn't pure enough to follow her dreams if she even had any. From this realization and the crushing weight of anxiety that weighs on her at her helplessness, she pushes her desires onto her boyfriend. As she spends idle days with Tanada, she encourages him to continue his band that once stopped after university. Meiko, who is unable to figure out what she wants, instead tries to precariously live her dreams through her boyfriend. But Solanin doesn't romanticize the pursuit of passion, which is shown in how Tanada's band just straight up sucks. They practice, record, play, and send out CDs to all major record labels in the hopes of getting picked up and signed. Tanada even quits his part-time job, leaving the two of them with no source of income in the middle of Tokyo. Though his passion is evident and his story follows that of other protagonists, he still fails. Because even when characters choose a path and know their passion, it won't always reach fulfillment and doesn't automatically solve their existing struggles. Solanin emphasizes the fact that some people just never find something that they want to do specifically. Meiko struggles with a ton of shit, and after quitting her job, she basically just tries everything she can. She picks up the guitar and sings, only to later drop both of those activities. Even in the epilogue, which was released 11 years after the series finished, she's shown to be continuously switching jobs and not yet have found her footing. And I honestly think that's the best way Asano could have written the story, because it explores Meiko's lack of purpose and how frustrating it can be, but also the fact that she's doing pretty well for herself. It's not like the lack of a dream makes Meiko an empty husk of a person. In fact, all the characters in the series feel like individual people. It's just that she still doesn't know what she wants to do, and in the end that's not an awful thing. She continues living on despite the lack of a clear direction and just accepts that this is how life can be. I love the series because of how mellow it is. It doesn't have extremely high peaks or low lows, yet it's still so painful, not in a way that made me cry reading it, but instead grabbed and just straight up strangled my heart. It's a grounded series that follows the life of mundane people. If it were a rock story, Taneda's band most likely would have made a breakthrough, but the series is not about music, despite the title being a song in the series and the main moving force being the band. It's a realistic portrayal of young adulthood combined with the feeling of being lost. The what ifs and what could be for those who don't find a particular passion, exploring the quarter-life crisis of adults in the early 20s who haven't found their thing yet. This quarter-life crisis is a big focus in coming-of-age stories and usually concludes with characters finding out that passion and in turn finding out who they are. And while Solanin portrays characters who struggle with Erikson's stage of identity, another genre takes a look at those who relish in it. Delinquency is a manga genre full of the baddest motherfuckers to ever be drawn, and it's based off the actual Bosozoku gangs in Japan. But I'm not talking about the actual delinquents that just torment others for fun, but those that use the role of delinquency as freedom in series like Crows by Hiroshi Takahashi and Clover by Tetsuhiro Hirakawa. It kind of doesn't make sense to correlate a fighting manga about high schoolers to Solanin, and I might be grasping at straws here. Crows follows Boya Harumichi as he transfers to a new school and makes a name for himself by just one-shotting everybody. Despite being a violent mess of action and brutality, these manga are character-driven and focus more on the relationships built rather than the fights themselves. The fights can be exciting and definitely get you pumped up, but they just come to a battle of who can hit harder. You read these manga because they're fun, chaotic, absurd, and kinda laid back, focusing on their day-to-day lives. Unlike Solanin, there's not this gripping feeling of despair that overhangs you while you're reading, and it's just fun to read the story as it is. Boya and Hayato respectively just do whatever the fuck they want, and it's through simple acts of freedom that their lives feel fulfilling and enjoyable. They aren't searching for a passion or trying to fit into a mold of success. They exist outside of the system altogether, reveling in a kind of messy, youthful privilege. Their rejection of ambition and direction might feel nihilistic, but it shows an alternative form of growth that's formed around their pride and community. The series title, Crows, is literally a description of the delinquents who wish to be free from their cages and unburdened by anything holding them back. A crow school full of guys who hate studying and aren't passionate about pursuing sports, so they don't know what to do with themselves. Their lifestyle centers around their fighting skills and reputation, which gives them a place to release all their tension of uncertainty. Of course, characters like Meiko and Taneda, and basically everyone that has a loving family, still has to burden expectations. But delinquents don't follow the social norm anyways, so it doesn't really apply to them. Skipping classes, roaming the streets, picking fights just for the sake of loyalty and fun, they reject their expectations and define their identity through their own terms. It's a form of escapism where they don't know what they want to do, so they just live in the territory they're comfortable in, where characters like Boya are able to thrive. I say this all, but it's not like delinquency is some glamorous lifestyle that allows someone to live life to the fullest. Boya isn't a delinquent because he's a bad guy or because of the way he was raised, it's just what he does. However, many actual delinquents personified in these series are forced into this life due to their upbringing or surroundings. Though it might seem like some of them are on top of the world, they still can't escape the consequences of their choices, and the series show that with many of the characters ending up lost. Crows has some great examples of this, with characters like Ishikawa, Maruken, and Senda. Senda, who is a proud, aggressive young man, is forced to eventually pick up a sales job, and loses the identity he once fought so hard to attain. Even when he reverts to his past self, his story is left unresolved like many other characters in these series. The author never goes into their future or what happens after because there's just nothing noteworthy. A lot of the time they leave everything they have behind and ultimately give up their future for their pride. One of my favorite examples of the brutality of delinquency is in the manga Out by Mizuto Makoto. It's extremely exaggerated but also extremely real in the way that these characters are ruining their chances for the future. With some of the most gruesome panels and action scenes that I've ever seen in a youth story, Out's characters end up paralyzed, crippled, and dead, and it's the harsh truth of actual delinquency and bosozoku gangs that leads characters in search of an identity into ruin. And yet, despite all of this, I still find their characters compelling. They haven't found themselves in a conventional sense, but instead live with a raw authenticity surrounded by their peers that's completely different from regular stories. Through their actions and support from their friends, they shine in their own corner of the world. Their lives might be chaotic, messy, and often tragic, but in a twisted way they found themselves similarly to those who follow the normal routes. Delinquency is all about the tension between freedom and responsibility, and how their rejections of expectations form who they are. Delinquents rebel against these norms and forge their identities outside of conventional boundaries, but they're still shaped by the weight of expectations, and many of them end up forced to take action in some way. But what if instead of having the regular working class shape your desires, instead you went out into the streets and just beat up random people? Or end up in a situation where you have to fight an evil dictator on a secluded island without any modern technology? One of my favorite mangaka, Kouji Mori, focuses on torturing his protagonists and shifting their view on life completely in the most absurd scenarios possible. Instead of stories with plot lines revolving around characters' passion and growth, Mori just thrusts these depressed, suicidal, aimless people into situations where they're forced to survive professional fighters, evil dictators, or fucking Nazis. Instead of letting characters find what they want and love, Mori puts them in absurd, hostile environments where they struggle to cling on to life. It's similar in a way that they are able to find their passion by luck and out of the blue, but Mori doesn't just let them stumble onto passion in the conventional sense, and instead allows them to reach it by being outside of their comfort zone and forcing them to adapt. Especially with the idea that all his protagonists begin the story at the lowest moment in their lives. Mori's most popular work, Holy Land, is a manga about a young boy named Yu Kamishiro, who, on the precipice of taking his own life, randomly decides to take up street fighting. Not going to the gym to learn jujutsu or MMA, he just trains in his own room, goes into the streets at night, and beats up other kids. This is absolutely absurd and one of the most crazy storylines ever, like literally all of his manga are, but Mori makes an effort to show the turning points in people's lives, especially in that specific quarter-life crisis. He grabs characters who are at literal rock bottom in life and transforms them through a series of tribulations that forces them to change. I mean, one of the series is literally called Suicide Island, and is just about a bunch of people shipped to an isolated place after their failed attempt. In all of Mori's stories, the main issue with each protagonist is that due to the social structure, the person becomes an outcast and is pushed to destruction. Yet through these niche scenarios and opportunities, they can shine and live life to the fullest. I love Mori's stories because of how simple they are, and yet how important the themes and messages are. Yu, who was once a secluded and depressed teenage boy, is not only now able to attend school, but bags bad bitches, makes new friends, and becomes more confident in himself and his abilities by beating up random kids on the street. It's not a great example of self-improvement, but the fact that Yu is able to find something that he didn't once have is inspiring, and though his activity might be a little messed up, it feeds his identity and what he lives for. Similarly, in Seisei no Taiga, the main character is a regular college student in the anthropology club. He's not particularly outstanding in anything, nor does he have any big aspirations or dreams. He simply lives to be alive and never pushes for anything greater than he thinks he can achieve. However, Taiga just happens to be magically thrown back into prehistoric times with mammoths and Neanderthals. In this rough setting, he's forced to survive and fight against various different creatures while protecting those close to him. It's through living like a prehistoric man and the very root of what it means to survive that Taiga finds the joy of living. All of Mori's characters struggle with their identity and what they're living for before they stumble onto the scenarios he's written. It's through their struggles and the forceful move out of their comfort zones that they're able to figure out who they are and what they live for. It's these ideas where the characters develop and become more than a blank slate that makes the entire series interesting. I love the journey that Mori forces his characters through and the changes that occur not only to their physical bodies, but their minds and how they evolve. I just think Mori's stories provide a slightly different perspective to the regular blooming passion and discovery of ambition. Instead of finding identity in clear dreams, the characters' paths are defined by necessity and desperation. It's through this distress that the characters are wrung through that they discover themselves and what they live for. Life without a passion isn't necessarily meaningless and can emerge through struggle, survival, or simply being alive long enough to stumble onto something worthwhile. Solanin was a depressing story about the mundanity of life and how it can interfere with how you view the world. But in the end, it also shows that we as people don't need anything special to ignite our lives, and we can just live on normally as is. It's not a requirement to have something more than you already are, and you don't need to have a greater purpose to experience life. Delinquency reflects this similar lens on passion, with people like Boya thriving in the absence of purpose. Meanwhile, Kouji Mori's protagonists just suffer and find their purpose through a forced change in environment. Basically, Erikson's fifth stage of development, focusing on identity, doesn't have the need to be formed around a passion. It just seems that this is the easiest choice for a lot of these series, and probably for a lot of people in general. But that doesn't mean we as people should be forced to find something to stick to and guide us throughout life. It's fine if it's a fucking mess of a discovery about who we are and it takes years to build an identity. Formation of who we are continues throughout our lifespan and isn't set during a specific time period that magically controls us for the rest of our lives. Honestly, I have no idea where I was going with this video, and I ended up just talking about a bunch of shit I like and how they are kind of connect to each other. I don't know if it's coherent at all, but I tried my hardest to have it make sense, and thank you for listening to me ramble.